If you earn six figures in 2026 and still feel like you are falling behind every single month, you are not imagining it. $100,000 a year sounds like real money. It sounds like the kind of number that means you made it, that the pressure should finally be easing. But for millions of people sitting at exactly that income level right now, the pressure is not easing, it is getting tighter. And the question worth asking is not what they are doing wrong. The question is what the system is doing that they cannot see. This is not personal failure, it is structural design. To understand why $100,000 no longer produces the life it once implied, you have to stop looking at the number and start looking at the environment that number has to survive inside. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a car that gets 30 miles per gallon. That number sounds the same every year, but if the roads get longer, the traffic gets worse, and gas costs 3 times what it used to, your car is effectively worse than it was, even though nothing about the car itself changed. That is what has happened to $100,000. The number stayed the same. The terrain it has to cover expanded in every direction. Start with what a dollar actually buys in 2026 compared to what it bought in the year 2000. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks this through something called the Consumer Price Index, which measures how much a standard basket of goods and services costs over time. What that index shows is that $100,000 today carries roughly the same purchasing power as about $42,000 did at the turn of the century. That is not an estimate. That is the compounded output of 2.5 decades of sustained price increases across housing, healthcare, education, and food. Your paycheck number went up. The amount of life that paycheck can actually buy went down. That gap is the core of what we are documenting today. Now look at the specific categories where prices did not just rise at the average rate, but exploded past it. Shelter costs in major metropolitan areas have increased between 80 and 140% since 2000, depending on which city you are in. That means a home or apartment that cost $1,000 a month in 2000 now costs somewhere between $1,800 and $2,400 a month for the exact same space. Health insurance premiums for a family of 4 now average over $23,000 per year when you combine what the employer pays and what comes out of your paycheck. That is nearly $2,000 a month just to have access to medical care, before a single copay or prescription. College tuition at a 4-year public university has increased at roughly 3 times the general inflation rate since 1980. A degree that cost $10,000 in tuition in 1990 now costs closer to $40,000 at many state schools. These are not small line items at the edge of the budget. These are the foundational costs of middle-class life, the things a $100,000 income was historically supposed to cover comfortably. And they have each repriced at a speed that wages simply did not match. That is where the dissonance lives. It is not that people earning 6 figures are spending recklessly. It is that the core infrastructure of a stable middle-class life now costs more than the income designed to support it. If this feels familiar, comment the word pressure below. I want to see how many people watching right now are feeling exactly this. To understand how we got here, you have to understand who benefits from prices being high and where the incentives in these markets actually point. Start with housing, because it is the clearest example. When a home increases in value, think about every party involved and ask yourself what they want. The existing homeowner wants prices to go up because their net worth goes up with it. The bank that holds the mortgage collects more total interest when home prices are higher and loan amounts are larger. The local government collects higher property tax revenue when valuations rise. The real estate agent earns a higher commission because commissions are a percentage of the sale price. Every single institutional player in the housing market has a direct financial incentive tied to prices going up. Now look at the buyer, specifically the first-time buyer trying to enter the market. That buyer is the only participant in the entire transaction whose financial interest aligns with prices being lower or staying flat. And that buyer is also the least capitalized, the least organized, and the least represented actor in the entire system. That asymmetry did not happen by accident. It is the natural result of decades of capital and influence concentrating on one side of a market. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as the incentives inside it would predict. Now extend this to wages, because wages are the other half of the pressure equation. Between 1979 and 2022, worker productivity in the United States grew by roughly 61%. That means workers were producing about 61% more economic output per hour than they were 4 decades earlier. But inflation-adjusted wages for the median worker grew by only about 15% over that same period. 61% more output, 15% more real pay. That is not a rounding error. That is 4 decades of economic value produced by workers and distributed somewhere other than worker paychecks. It moved into corporate profit margins, executive compensation, and returns for shareholders. The system produced significantly more wealth. The mechanism deciding where that wealth flows shifted in a very specific direction. That is where fragility begins. Now in 2026, a new layer of pressure is building on top of everything we just described. Artificial intelligence is beginning to restructure the labor market in a way that is different from how technology disrupted work in the past. Historically, automation replaced physical and repetitive tasks, factory floors, assembly lines, data entry. The assumption was that knowledge workers, people who analyze, write, and make judgment calls, were protected from that kind of displacement. That assumption is being tested right now. The current generation of AI tools is beginning to automate analytical work, research work, and communication work, which is exactly the category that educated middle-class professionals have used to justify their wage premium for the last 30 years. When the work that made someone worth $100,000 a year becomes automatable, what happens to the price of that labor? It compresses. That compression has not fully arrived yet in most industries. But the early signals are visible in hiring slowdowns, in the elimination of mid-level roles, and in restructuring announcements that frame headcount cuts as efficiency gains. Costs rising from below, wage premiums compressing from above. If you find this kind of calm, structural breakdown useful, subscribe. Most financial content reacts to headlines. We document the systems underneath them. Now bring in interest rates, because they are the third major force reshaping what a 6-figure income can actually do. From 2008 through 2021, the Federal Reserve held interest rates near zero as a deliberate policy response, first to the financial crisis and then through the pandemic. Near zero interest rates mean borrowing money is cheap. And when borrowing money is cheap, the price of things you borrow money to buy tends to go up. If rates are very low, a buyer can afford to borrow a much larger amount because the monthly payment stays manageable. More borrowing power in the hands of buyers pushes prices up. The same logic applied to stocks, real estate, and private investments across the board. The people who already owned assets before rates were cut saw their net worth expand. The people who needed to borrow to buy assets watched prices move out of reach while rates were low. Then when rates rose sharply beginning in 2022, the cost of carrying new debt became expensive. But asset prices did not fully fall back down. The window had already closed. A mortgage on a median-priced home in the United States now consumes a larger share of median household income than at any recorded point in modern data. That is the math of where prices landed and where borrowing costs moved to. The middle-income household that was not yet an asset holder absorbed both sides of that transition at once. Prices stayed high, debt got expensive, leverage increases speed in any direction. It also increases fragility. This pattern is not unique to 2026. Recognizing that it repeats is one of the most useful things you can take from this video. In the 1970s, inflation eroded purchasing power as energy and commodity prices surged ahead of wages. In the early 1980s, rates were raised aggressively to break that inflation, and the recession that followed devastated manufacturing communities across the country. In the early 2000s, easy credit created a feeling of widespread wealth that was mostly paper-based and not yet real. When the bubble deflated, that paper wealth disappeared faster than it had appeared. In the mid-2000s, easy mortgage lending created the same illusion inside housing. In 2008, that illusion collapsed, and the institutions that built those lending structures were stabilized, while the households that borrowed within them absorbed the losses. The mechanism changes shape every decade or so. The direction of risk does not. Risk flows toward the most leveraged, least buffered position in the system, and in each of these cycles that position was occupied by middle-income households carrying debt against income with no meaningful reserve. What makes 2026 different is the number of these pressures arriving simultaneously. Inflation rose and partially receded, but did not return prices to where they were. Interest rates rose and remained elevated. AI disruption is accelerating inside the labor market. Asset prices remain out of reach relative to current income levels. Any one of these conditions creates real pressure on a middle-income household. All four at once, in the same economy, on the same paycheck, is not a normal cycle. That is the environment a $100,000 income is navigating right now. The number did not change. The terrain it has to cover has pressure coming from multiple directions at once. For those who want to go deeper into the structural frameworks and decision models built for environments like this, I build those inside the Luxona Vault on Patreon. That is where the full systems live. Understanding the structure does not change your position overnight, but it changes the quality of every decision you make from that position, and that difference compounds over time. In a system where purchasing power is declining, the most durable response is not just to earn more inside the same cost structure. It is to get a clear picture of which costs are fixed, which are flexible, and where real optionality still exists in your specific situation. In a labor market where the premium on knowledge work is compressing, the relevant question is not which job feels safe today. It is which combination of human judgment and skill sits at the intersection of what AI cannot yet do and what the market still needs done. These are not instructions. They are the coordinates of the current terrain. In any system under sustained pressure, the scarcest resource is not income. It is margin, the gap between what reliably comes in and what is already committed to go out before you make a single choice. That margin is what determines whether the next disruption is an inconvenience or a crisis. Is what you are seeing in 2026 a design flaw in the system? Or is it the system operating exactly as the incentives inside it were always going to produce? Comment below. I want to read how people are thinking about this. This is Luxona.